guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. This is the next video in my regret or relief series where I talk about eyeshadow palettes which I have decluttered, passed along, parted ways with, and I am really reflecting on them and whether or not I missed them. Now, ordinarily, I don't, but I think there are one or two in here that if they were still in my collection, I'd be pretty happy about it. I don't know, let's see, let's talk about it. The regret or relief playlist is linked below in my description box. If you're curious about today's eyeshadow look, I did film it and I will link that video below as well in the description box, and if I remember, I'll card it above here for you guys. Let's start off with BH Cosmetics. In their heyday, in the time when they were the it brand, they knew what they were doing, they had figured out their formula, and they released the Sweet Shop series. I want to talk about the Pistachio palette. Now I owned Pistachio, Cherry on Top, Orange Sorbet. Technically, I still have Orange Sorbet, but the others I have passed along. Orange Sorbet is for sale, and Pistachio is already out of my collection. Now, I thought that they were all lovely, and the quality was amazing, and I really have nothing bad to say about the palettes per se. I just find I'm not really into monochromatic palettes anymore. The Pistachio was my favorite of the three, and it was just 8 beautiful shades of green, and I love green eyeshadow, so it was an easy winner for me. And as I said, the formula was wonderful. The reason I passed it along was because I was just not really using monochromatic palettes anymore. By that point, I had come to really appreciate a well-curated color story, and I found that when I wanted greens, I had other palettes that gave me greens in a beautiful array of colors, but also gave me other things that worked with greens, other things that I thought would be pretty or at least fun to pair with greens, and so I found that I was never reaching into monochromatic palettes. I wanted to pass this one along when I found that I wasn't using it because I knew that it was great quality and a beautifully performing palette, wonderful formula, and I wanted to give it to somebody who would appreciate it and use it more than I was. So I don't regret passing this one along, but I did enjoy it while I owned it. Let's talk about Sigma. Now, I have tried 2 Sigma palettes in the past. I had the Alice in Wonderland and I had the Untamed. I passed both of them along. Today we're talking about Alice in Wonderland. And just Sigma in general, the reason I passed along both of them was because I felt that their formula, while very good and high quality, wasn't my utter tip-top favorite. I found that it overblended a bit, and I have actually brought a new Sigma palette into my collection. I'm trying them out again, giving them another chance and seeing if they've changed anything. But I thought that the Alice palette was really fun. I bought this for my birthday, ironically, because my new one's also for my birthday. And the color story was just really lovely. I very much enjoyed the Cinderella palette that came out before Alice, but it wasn't happening, and Alice was on sale when I bought it. And I think I bought this one and then paired it with Untamed to kind of try to bridge the gap into something more Cinderella-esque, because the Cinderella palette had purples in it, which Alice didn't. The color story of Alice was cute. I mean, it was some neutrals, and then all of this is off the top of my head because I forgot to look at pictures ahead of time, but Alice also had a couple green, a green shimmer, I think, and maybe blue, and it was cute. I just found that overall I didn't think it was that unique along with everything else that I owned, and if I had other palettes that were offering a similar color story in a formula which I preferred, then I didn't need to keep Alice. So I passed this one along and also don't really regret it. I really didn't like the packaging of the Alice palette. It was very psychedelic, which makes perfect sense with the theme. I don't care for that packaging, and it kind of gave me a little bit of a headache when I looked at it. That probably also contributed a bit, because I found that packaging really makes a difference for me. I need to enjoy the whole experience, not just the shadows themselves. So great quality shadows. I really enjoyed, on the whole, the looks that I got from it, and I have very much enjoyed the looks that other people have gotten from this palette, but it wasn't being used, and I thought, well, hey, why don't I just pass it on while it still has some value in it, because it was pretty new. The Udenzai Mini Forest palette. This was, I think, in my very first Udenzai order. I had gotten a few palettes from them for Christmas. I got Mini Forest and I got Mini Ocean, and I liked this one better than Mini Ocean. I think if I still had it, I would use it. It wasn't, again, the most striking color story. I do remember there being sort of, if I recall, kind of a light purpley silver shimmer. I might be wrong about that, but I do remember liking this palette. I just wish it had gone a little bit darker so I could get what I felt was a complete look. I don't regret getting rid of this palette because it was also Udenzai's older formula. Their newer stuff is a bit better. And while I didn't have any problems with the shades in the Mini Forest palette specifically, it also wasn't super exciting. and it was also small, and I tend to forget about small palettes. 6 pans is pretty much my, like, I need to be at least 6 pans, and then I'm still not likely to remember it most of the time. And the mini forest, all of the mini palettes from Udensai, they were a 6-pan format, and then the center one was split, I think. Or was it 5 pans and the center was split? I think it was 5 and the center was split. Again, I'm sorry, this is off the top of my head. I just had a chance to film and I thought I'd throw this video in here. But anyway, it was a very pretty palette. I did enjoy the color story. It was very earthy. If I recall, it had like a yellowy tone and a brownie and sagey green, really pretty earthy colors. I think if I had it, I would use it, but I'm not sad that it's gone because I have other things that I really enjoy. Let's talk about the Colourpop High Tide palette. Now, Colourpop has fallen and fallen in my esteem as far as their eyeshadow formula. It's not that I think it's bad, I just have lots that are way better. I like Colourpop for other things, and their High Tide palette was one I got when I was buying just a lot of Colourpop, and especially their monochromatics. I was so excited when they launched High Tide. They launched it with the fuchsia one called Fine Feathered, and I was like, oh my goodness, teal is so beautiful, and I think teal works with most skin tones, works with cool tones, warm tones, olive tones. I just think teal is a great color pretty universally. And so I grabbed this palette, and I thought the packaging was cute with the little sea urchins, and it was textured, and per Colourpop standard, they did a really good job with their cardboard packaging. I decluttered this one because, again, monochromatic wasn't really reaching for. It had other palettes that gave me teal options along with other things, but also I thought that this palette, while it was pretty, and while it did have some lovely shades, didn't quite have a ton of variety. And I understand the difficulty. If the category is teal, and you go too light, you're going to end up with something more minty or baby blue-ish. And if you go too dark, you're going to end up with maybe more navy-ish tones. So the High Tide palette I thought was a little bit less varied than I really wanted it to be. I wish that it had a smidge more variety, and I even would have given them a little leeway to lean more towards slightly minty tones if we could have gotten some lighter shades in there. It was really pretty. I remember, I think, 2 of the shimmers being gorgeous, but it wasn't enough to justify me owning a 9-pan of all, I mean, more or less the same color. While we're on the subject of Colourpop, because if you've watched any of these previous regret or relief videos, you'll know that I bought a lot of Colourpop in the beginning. So Colourpop features pretty heavily in these videos. Well, let's talk about the Main Squeeze palette. This was their watermelon themed palette, and I got this one instead of, like, I remember looking at their other like red pink options, and I grabbed Main Squeeze. And it was cute, it was fine. It was in the plastic packaging, which I did not like. It never seemed to close properly. And it was just really, like, it felt cheaper. This was fine. I didn't dislike this palette, but again, I didn't really get very interesting looks with it, not very varied looks. And I found that it didn't tend to pull watermelon tone on my skin. It all ended up looking more pink. It's tricky because you're working with individual undertones. Everyone's a little bit different. Maybe on some people it pulled orange, and some it pulled pink, and some it pulled red, and some were like corally in the middle, actual watermelon tones. It just didn't quite pay off the way that I wanted it to, and I found I was never using it. So I don't at all regret not having this palette anymore. It was cute, that's all. I also had the Garden Variety palette from Colourpop. This one was larger, had smaller pan sizes. Smaller? No, it just had more pans, I guess. And I thought this one was really pretty. Again, I very much enjoyed the packaging. These beautiful little succulents in different colors. Some were sort of embossed, some were kind of glossy. It was really pretty packaging. It was a really pretty color story. I actually brought this one traveling. I remember we went to Colorado and I brought this palette with me, and I remember doing my eyeshadow in the car one day. I think as far as color story, it's not very unique now compared to what I have already. And as far as formula, again, it's not as good. So I don't regret not having it. I do think it's pretty. There were a couple of shades in this palette that were especially lovely. There was like a really light champagne-y kind of color, just a very light tone, beautiful inner corner, beautiful brow bone, but also it would give nice contrast to a lot of the other shades. There was a sagey green shimmer in here, I think, and like purpley tone, which never performed as well as I wanted it to. I never got Colourpop's purples to perform terribly well, especially the shimmers. I've heard that purple is hard to formulate. But anyway, I thought the palette was pretty. I ended up selling this one, I think, to a friend of mine who had just gotten into eyeshadow a little after I did. And so she was watching my videos, and then she was buying some palettes that I had listed. And it was just a really good match for her because she liked less vibrant, bold colors. She liked things that were a bit more pared down. And this palette was a lovely, very springy, neutral kind of palette. It was neutral tones with the greens and the browns and the slight pinky purpley kinds of colors, but it was tempered. It was not too bold and in your face. It was quieter and more subtle, and it was pretty, but I don't regret not having it anymore. Okay, let's move from Colourpop briefly to talk about Glamlight. It might have been the first palette I bought from Glamlight, actually. I think it was, or my first order from Glamlight anyway, was the Michaela palette, the very first one. They collaborated, and I thought this palette was kind of great, actually. I really liked the formula. Like I said, I think it was my first Glamlight order, so I got Michaela and I got Dirty Martini and maybe one other. I got their eye primer. And anyway, the palette was really pretty, very well balanced, I think, in terms of lightness and depth, and it did have a lot of purples. Michaela really likes her purples. And I thought it was nice. I mean, I did a whole week of Michaela, I did a whole week of looks with just this palette. You can check my channel for my week of playlist, where I feature just one palette for an entire week of looks, and I've got many videos in that playlist. Michaela was one of the palettes, and I did at least 4 looks within that week, and then I did probably 2 or 3 or 4 other videos using the Michaela palette. This one was purchased pretty early on as well. Once I got into eyeshadow and then found colorful eyeshadow, I was like all in, and I really did like this palette. I ended up passing it along kind of for a few reasons. The first would be that I wasn't using it so much anymore. I had used it a lot and was ready to try new things. And it didn't have anything to do with the formula. The formula was still very good. But the other reason I passed it along was because I just don't like Michaela. She doesn't seem like a very upstanding person. She's involved in a lot of scandals, a lot of drama. I'm not sure how genuine she is. And honestly, aside from any reflection on her character at all, I just don't like the way she presents. I just don't like the way that she presents herself. And so I didn't necessarily want to own something that was really highlighting a person whom I didn't necessarily want to support. And that's the other reason I got rid of the Michaela palette. So again, great quality, but there were other reasons for me not to keep it anymore. Finally, Colourpop gets 2 more mentions here. Let's talk about their Making Mauves palette. This is one that I do kind of wish I had back in my collection, only for the colors. And this kind of reminds me of like the Natasha Denona Retro, only I thought the shimmers in this palette were even better. I mean, from what I remember, and it was, I don't know, 3 years ago at this point, the shimmers in this palette were so beautiful. It's not to say that I don't have shimmers like that now. I have gorgeous shimmers throughout my collection. But it was these tones, which I now enjoy more than I used to, and these specific shades, and the packaging was beautiful. And even though it wasn't a super interesting palette, again, it was monochromatic. There wasn't a ton of depth. There was an okay assortment of depth, but I just love the shimmers in this palette, and I kept it longer than I expected, or once I was ready to pass it on, I held on to it because of the shimmers. So if I had it back, I think I would actually get some use out of it. Probably mainly for the sparkles. I would probably pair these shimmers with other palettes, maybe even the Natasha Denona Retro, which does have pretty shimmers, but I think that these were a little more foiled, a little more striking. So I kind of missed that one. I'm not going to go buy it again, but I do think that it was a really pretty palette. And the last video, or the last palette for today's video, is the Colourpop Too Haute. Part of they had a series of little 5 pans, and like there was like a neon green one that had yellows in it, and there were a couple others, and Too Haute was all pink. This one I didn't really declutter per se. I dropped it and it broke. And when it broke, one of the shadows 2 of the shadows totally shattered. And then I kept the singles in a magnetic palette that I had picked up somewhere along the line. And then I never used them. I never, ever used them. So I ended up giving them away along with other singles as a freebie, I think, in an order, because I was like, you know what, just go to somebody who will hopefully use them, because I'm not using them, and it felt like such a waste to have these things and to not be touching them. So I can't really say I decluttered this one per se. I just decluttered a fraction of it. But I did really like the shimmer in this palette. It was pretty. So if I was in a pink mood, then that would be something I'd go for. But again, I just have pinks elsewhere now, and they're arranged with other colors that look pretty, and I don't feel the need to have a monochromatic pink palette. That about wraps up today's video. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing before you go. I do upload several videos every week. Check my description box for a playlist and other information and suggestions. You might like other content on my channel. Have a look around. I've got playlists for pretty much almost every single brand that I've ever featured on my channel. There were one or two like one-offs that I don't have a playlist dedicated, but any of the most popular indie brands, yeah, they're on here, and I've got like 550 videos or something on my channel, so have a look around. Perhaps you'll consider liking and subscribing if you like this content and you want to see more. I appreciate your time so much, and I will see you next time. Bye.